Welcome back. It is day 65 of our 90-day New Testament reading plan with New Life Youth. My name is Christian. Thank you for joining me again today. Today we wrap up the book of 1 Timothy with chapters 4 through 6. Now, 1 Timothy 4 is really where we find our penultimate youth ministry verse, right? That's 1 Timothy 4 verse 12. Paul writes this to Timothy. He says, "Don't let anyone look down on you because you are young, but set an example for the believers in speech, in life, in love, in faith, and in purity." Like, this is the age-old verse that circles youth ministries everywhere and has since the time that I was young, for sure. I remember going to concerts as a student and seeing young bands sharing this verse from the stage regularly as part of what they did as an encouragement. Now, here's the deal. Just because this verse is used often in youth ministry or is repeated often, it does not take away from any of the meaning or the power behind it. Like, this is still very much an encouragement. You see, Timothy had been working with Paul for quite some time. He traveled with Paul on his missionary journeys as a teenager. Even here with the church of Ephesus, he is still a young individual. He's a young pastor, probably in his mid-30s is what we can estimate. And so this message, while it was for Timothy, like, it still rings true for us today. Like, if you are young and you're watching this, like, this is an encouragement to you. Like, you have an opportunity to set an example for other believers. I see students in my ministry who are serving God and chasing God and showing up regularly to serve and to volunteer. They're growing their relationship with the Lord. And these individuals may not even recognize it, but it is such a challenge for other believers. It is such a challenge for other Christians in the church when they see that, and it prods them and pushes them forward. And there's always going to be those individuals who kind of look down on those who are young, but that's why Paul is saying, hey, don't let anyone look down on you because you're young. It's something I push for constantly, is for the church to recognize and see that young people are not the church of tomorrow, but they are the church of today. Like, your value matters. Like, you carry value, you have impact now. Like, those things matter today. So if you're young and you're watching this, or maybe even if you're not like really a seasoned Christian, like, understand that you still bring value to the table. You do bring value to the table. So don't be afraid to serve. Don't be afraid to love. Don't be afraid to grow. And don't be afraid to set an example for others in your attitude, in your speech, in your life, and in your faith. But how do we do that? Paul gives us a clue. Like, how do we do that as young people? And I say us, like young people, like I'm young, I'm 38. To me, like, that sounds ancient when I say it out loud. I'm surprised I'm even that old, or that I made it that far. But here's the deal. Paul wrote this to Timothy, who was in his mid-30s and maybe a little bit younger. Youth is so relative, though, right? Because when you think about that, Paul is in his 70s. And so if Timothy is 35, let's say, he is young in comparison to Paul at the time Paul is writing this. So he is still very youthful. And even for Timothy, in the position that he holds, it's such an influential position that he holds. And for someone his age, it would not have been the norm to have that kind of a position. Now, we see plenty of lead pastors of churches who are in their, 30s, maybe late 30s and 40s. But at that time, it was definitely outside of the norm. He would not have been a leader at a church based on his age. And so Paul instructs him before this, because Paul views him as a young individual. He says in verse 7 and 8, he says, have nothing to do with the godless myths and old wives' tales. Rather, train yourself to be godly, for physical training is of some value, but godliness has value for all things, holding promise for both the present life and the life to come. Like, Paul, time and again, we will see him use these metaphors of athletics or training your body. Even we see later, he says, fight the good fight, which we're going to touch on, which is almost like a box. Like, to us is like, that's like a boxing metaphor almost, or a military maybe type metaphor. But he uses these physical ideas of physical training and compares that to godly training. Like, yes, physical training and that discipline is good. Get swole, like, let's go. But even more important than that is that training and godliness. Like, that is the thing that is going to hold us up, especially as we're young. We grow in godliness, we grow in faith, we grow in righteousness. And those are the things that are going to carry us not just now, but into eternity. That's the important thing that we chase and seek is we seek godliness. And so Paul goes on in chapter 6, he says, pursue righteousness, godliness, faith, love, endurance, and gentleness. And then he says, fight the good fight of faith. Like there is this recognition, there's a challenge ahead for Timothy as he is pastoring this church, as he is even just walking out the life that God calls him to live. The reality is, like, when we go God's way, that is so against the grain of culture. That is against the flow of culture. And so for us and for Timothy, like, we have to have this soldier's determination as it comes to walking out our faith. We have to be strong. We have to recognize that it's going to be a fight at times. And I think sometimes as believers, we really underestimate what it really looks like to follow God. Like, we sometimes expect a bed of roses, like smooth sailing, but really it's truly a fight. And so we need endurance. We need to stand the test of time. There needs to be grit and determination in our lives, and definitely some fight in us if we're going to make it through. And we need to take on that same charge that Paul gives to Timothy here in this letter. But Paul closes out this letter by saying, guard what has been entrusted to your care. You may not see it right now, but there are things that God is entrusting to your care. Like, you may not recognize that, but there are family and friends, the gospel, your own life, your heart, and there are these things that are entrusted to your care. In the Psalms, we're encouraged, guard your heart, for it's the wellspring of life, right? Like, you may not fully see what's been entrusted to you, but there's this weight that we have to shoulder. There are things we have to guard. We have to guard our heart. We have to guard our faith and the gospel. And there are things that are entrusted to us, like family and friends and people who surround us that are entrusted to us, and even jobs that are entrusted to us, things and tasks that we need to guard and take care of, and do well with that. We have to shoulder that weight of those things that we guard, and we have to do a good job of that. Like yesterday we said in 2 Corinthians, I think it is. I think we talked about in 2 Corinthians a little bit yesterday how at the end of our lives, like, we sit at judgment and we have to hold account. Like, we have to give account of all the things that have been entrusted to us. And at the end of my life, like, I don't want to be ashamed and say, man, I really let you down in those things that you entrusted me with. And so because of that, we have to take it seriously. So we hold on to these biblical truths that we're learning, because we live in a culture that is constantly trying to pull us in another direction. And so that is why we continue to fight the good fight. And so, of course, don't discredit yourself due to your age. You bring value to the table. So remember that. You bring value to the table no matter your age. Like, I hope you recognize that, and I hope you see that. And with all that, like, guard those things that God is entrusting to you. Okay. But really that does it. Not a huge commentary today for the book of Timothy for me. I think we saved that for yesterday. Long one yesterday, shorter one today. So, but of course, tomorrow we tackle all of 2 Timothy. So join us back here tomorrow. And of course, let us know what you're learning from the reading today. You can let us know here on YouTube. Let us know in the YouVersion Bible Plan. And of course, we hope to see you tomorrow.